it felt like every cell in my body was covered in concrete and dirt and spikes and shards of glass. And it was agony, agony. And I thought, oh my God, I died and I'm in hell. This is the feeling of hell. And then I started to hear these masculine voices, and they were very etheric, and they kept saying, you are worthy of all the love in the universe. You are worthy of all the love in the universe. And so I followed those voices, and I had this amazing experience in heaven. And to state the contrast of who I was when I entered this space of eternity, I was a drug addict, a prostitute, an orphan to suicide. I was a liar, a manipulator, a thief. I was a rapist. I was a racist. I was a manipulative abuser, and none of it mattered. I was just enveloped in this unconditional love and grace of the divine.
Podcast. The opinions expressed on Broaderlen's podcast are those of the guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or Broaderlen's podcast. Betty Guadagno, welcome to Broaderlen's podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for holding space.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to get you on because I love the fact that you're in recovery. And I also love the fact that you talk a lot about trauma, which I love to talk about, and your Kundalini awakening experience, which is profound. So thank you for coming on again.
So excited. Yeah, I love talking about trauma. Let's do
it. I guess I would probably want to ask you, who were you before this awakening? And maybe you can walk us into your childhood right after that.
I grew up in a really chaotic, dysfunctional home. My whole family is a perpetual cycle of addiction and poverty and sexual trauma and everything that goes along with that. So no foundation, constantly moving, stealing groceries, stealing electricity. It was just very, very chaotic. And my parents were both addicts and their parents were addicts. And so it's been that way in my family for generations and generations. And I made all these mental notes as a kid that as soon as I was able to use drugs and drink alcohol, that's what I was going to do. Because I saw all these people in my family that if they took a pill or they drank something or they smoked something, their whole mood changed. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to not feel all of the traumatic things that I had already endured as just a small child. So, my addiction really picked up a lot of speed at a really young age, and I went full throttle all the way. It was never like, oh, I'm going to experiment with my friends. I'm going to party on the weekend. It was like, okay, these are drugs. This is now my life. This is my whole personality. And in 2007, my parents, who were both addicts, they had really hit like the end of their road in their own addiction. And they were sick and tired of being sick and tired. And they made this decision that they had to stop using drugs. And the only way that they knew how to do that was to do what they had seen other people do. And so my parents ended up committing suicide with one another when I was 23 to end their active addiction. They didn't even know that there was a way to stop using drugs without dying. And so for me in my life today, I'm so grateful that I found recovery, because I also thought that there was never going to be a way for me to stop using drugs without dying. But today I know that's not true. And I have so many tools to help me with my own addiction.
What kind of words of compassion you can give for those who may not understand the addict? Because a lot of times people drive by and a lot of times people drive by the, freeway, seeing some homeless people that are suffering from addiction and trauma, but they just look at them as losers. Why can't they just get it? Why don't they just stop? And whatever else goes through the brain. But what kind of words of compassion and understanding you can give to someone that does not understand people that are alcoholics or addicts?
I think that it's the same words of compassion for anybody. Today in my life, I have a lot of compassion for people who are struggling with homelessness or addiction. because I have the lived experience of that and overcoming it. But, other people don't have that lived experience. So I like to, when I really am having a hard time being compassionate towards people, because it might not be a homeless addict, but it could be somebody who I think is a liar or very controlling, those people bother me. So when I have moments where I have to call on compassion, I just remember that at one point in time, everybody was a small baby. Everybody was an infant. And then if I want to go even deeper and more spiritual with that, everybody has a divine soul resting inside of them. And the outer circumstance of what we perceive is not necessarily what's true. Often when I see homeless drug addicts, I think, wow, that soul is super brave and signed up for a really hardcore mission. And I appreciate the work that they're putting into their mission. Now, tangibly in the real world, like in the 3D experience, we don't see that their soul is working hard, maybe transmuting some negative energy. But just like in the regular kind of reality, for me, a great tool that I use to be compassionate is to remember that everybody was a helpless newborn once. And I try to look at everybody as if they are a newborn still.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of times, I got sober in a 12-step movement, similar to yours, and a lot of times they say what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. But I like to say what happened, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And as it escalated, you in life, and it seemed like you learned coping skills with alcohol and drugs, like I did. Those were the coping skills I learned to just give me some kind of relief, temporary relief. But how did your addiction escalate? If you don't mind walking us into your journey with addiction.
Yeah. I mean, it was never not going to escalate. And the dis-ease of addiction is progressive in nature. And now I have that deep understanding because it wasn't always how it was in the end for me. In the end narrative of my active addiction was that I was a homeless meth head prostitute strung out on heroin. That's where drugs took me after 22 years of using them. But the first couple of years of using drugs, it was nothing like that. I could still maintain some semblance of sanity. And it didn't really get to a point where I realized how bad it was probably until the last 6 or 7 years of my active addiction. That's when I realized, okay, I am an absolute insane person, because not only had I lost my parents to addiction, and I mean, that could have been a huge wake up call for me. But instead of me, I heard two voices when it happened. I heard, wow, you should stop using drugs. They just killed your parents. And then the other voice that made more sense to me was, you can't stop using drugs. This is all that you have left of your parents. What kind of daughter would you be if you let go of the legacy of your family, regardless of what kind of legacy it is? You are them and they are you, and they are drugs and you are drugs. And so in that moment, my addiction became my parent, and my addiction became my guiding star. It came before every relationship, every marriage, every family relationship, every job, every apartment, every pet. I mean, there was nothing more important than my addiction and feeding that part of me. And, it was my main coping skill. I had gone through so much, especially with the death of my parents. I had no idea how to handle what that was like. And I thank my addiction for getting me through that, because I honestly don't know if I would be alive without my addiction guiding me through that part of my life, because it was so insanely painful. This huge gaping wound of abandonment and rejection that I felt from my parents' death. So, my addiction ended up just it bottomed me out on every drug imaginable. And alcohol is most definitely a drug. And alcohol is really what took me to my knees. And I mean, I was a heroin addict, I was a meth head, but alcohol destroyed me. It destroyed me. And it was so cheap and so accessible. And that was one of the main reasons why it was my detriment. And the first time that I ever tried to do recovery was from, like the alcohol really bringing me to my knees. And I went into a detox at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I blew a a 0.385 on the breathalyzer at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I said, please help me. I'm going to die. And they said, we don't have any beds. You're going to have to try again tomorrow. I was like, if you turn me away, something's going to happen. I'm going to get hit by a bus. Like, I can't do this anymore. And they found space for me. And, I didn't stay in recovery after that, but that was the first time that I really admitted that there was something wrong. And that was probably about 6 years before I actually really stepped into recovery.
Thank you for saying alcohol is a drug, because a lot of times I think there's a collective misunderstanding, especially with the singleness of purpose, when you identify with a certain label and then you get kicked out at times, and it's just the ego at large, not understanding the true nature of addiction. Because, like in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, for an example, they will say, alcohol became my master. Well, that's what the word addiction means. If you could really trace it down to the core, it means it has something to do with being a slave. And back in the Sumerian and Roman days, if you couldn't pay your creditor, you were assigned as a slave until you paid off your debt. Well, if we look at addiction, the Latin word addictus, it's the same thing. We become a slave to this habit, a slave to these behaviors, a slave to this conditioned state of being that we get stuck in, which for me, I believe it's the root cause is trauma. And trauma really means wound, and we become wounded, and those wounds become trapped inside us. So we need to help. And when you put add stress to that, and pushing to that unhealed wounds, we need to medicate ourselves. And the more we do that, the harder that habit becomes harder to break. So I appreciate your words of wisdom. So thank you.
I was just going to say, I did a lot of research on my own to find all these words of wisdom. I really took myself through the trenches. So I appreciate you saying that.
You talked about having an awakening, a Kundalini awakening, or a near-death-like experience, which is pretty profound. In a lot of details you explain. Maybe you can walk us into that experience.
Yeah. Oh my God. Alchemy. Sign me up for it. I love it. Rock bottom to outer space. So, like I shared, the end of the road for me with my addiction was homelessness, prostitution, degradation, dereliction. It was very dark. And I was also a gigantic abuser of other people. I'm not just a victimized person. I am a victimized person who victimized other people. We have a saying that hurt people and healed people heal people. Well, I was definitely on that end of it. I was causing mass amounts of harm. And I was using my addiction and substances to really give me some sort of solace in the fact that I had become a monster. I really was an aggressive, ruthless, dominant, just mean person. I was really out of control. And I ended up having an overdose. And I used over 6 substances every day. I had this long laundry list of drugs that I used. And, it's very expensive. And so I had to do whatever I had to do to get the drugs that I needed to get. And one day I took too many. And I ended up having this near-death-like experience, like you shared. I perceived that it was a Kundalini awakening. And if you don't know what Kundalini energy is, that's okay. Neither did I. So Kundalini roughly translates into life force. So I had a life force energy activation awakening, where every single one of my chakra systems, which I didn't even know what a chakra was, but my energetic spiritual body was coming online in these different stages. So I had this rush of energy going up and down my spine from my root to my crown. And when the rush of energy hit my third eye and my crown chakra, it was like my head opened up and my spirit shot out. And I went and I started to travel into the space of eternity in this non-physical realm. And it's the same space that near-death experiencers describe. The first thing that happened to me in my experience was I had what I perceived was a life review, because I started to feel every emotion that you could ever imagine on earth. So I was feeling just anguish and disgust and embarrassment and confusion and fear and grief and guilt and shame. And it was so overwhelming. And I realize now that I was actually feeling the experiences that I had had with other people. And then the really vivid one that sticks out for me is that I experienced my parents' suicide. Not only did I experience it from the point of view as myself, as a grieving daughter, but I also experienced it as them. And I cannot even describe in human words what that feeling was. It felt like every cell in my body was covered in concrete and dirt and spikes and shards of glass. And it was agony, agony. And I thought, oh my God, I died and I'm in hell. This is the feeling of hell. And then I started to hear these masculine voices, and they were very etheric, and they kept saying, you are worthy of all the love in the universe. You are worthy of all the love in the universe. And so I followed those voices, and I had this amazing experience in heaven. And to state the contrast of who I was when I entered this space of eternity, I was a drug addict, a prostitute, an orphan to suicide. I was a liar, a manipulator, a thief. I was a rapist. I was a racist. I was a manipulative abuser, and none of it mattered. I was just enveloped in this unconditional love and grace of the divine. And while I was in that space, I was greeted by this table of beings. And I knew that I was home. I mean, I didn't know what was going on. I thought that I was just tripping really hard. I was like, whoa, this is wild. This is so crazy. And this table of beings, they had this big, huge gold book in front of them. And they were thumbing through the book, and they said, nice to see you. Prepare for your jump back down. You're not meant to stay here right now. And I was looking around me, and I was like, you guys aren't talking to me, are you? I mean, I don't know where I am or who you are, but I know that this place feels way better than where I just was. And I'm definitely not going back to where I just was. And then everything started to come into my awareness where I was, that I was home, and that these were the people in charge. And, I realized that I had gone to Earth on some sort of mission. All of this stuff was coming into my mind's eye and my awareness all at once. And I was downloaded with this information that I was a divine spiritual warrior, and that I had actually signed up to go down to Earth for Earth's ascension, for the transformation of consciousness. And mind you, at this time, I'm a militant atheist. I don't believe in God. I don't believe in spirituality. I don't believe in anything other than drugs, and that's it. That's my whole life. So, being in this space and having this whole experience, I couldn't believe that I was wrong. I was like, this is crazy. Am I actually wrong? This is nuts. There's no way that I'm wrong. And in that space, they took me through the details of my pre-birth plan. So they told me that I had actually designed the life that I was living. And the way that I saw it in my mind's eye was it looked like a lot like a grocery store. And I had this big empty grocery cart, and lining the walls of the grocery store were these big giant cereal boxes. And every cereal box had a life experience on it. And because I was coming to Earth for a specific mission for this great awakening, for this transformation of consciousness, I needed to pick a life experience where I would be able to transmute energy, not only for myself and the family line that I chose to be born into, but also for the collective itself. And so I chose things like childhood sexual trauma and rape and addiction and poverty and homelessness, because these are things that people in the collective deal with. These are real, dense experiences that require healing on a collective level. And then there were things in the cart that I hadn't gotten to yet, like overcoming and recovery, spiritual awakening, being a speaker, being an author. But none of those things had happened in my life. So I just thought, wow, that's lovely cart filler. And after being downloaded with this belief, with this knowing, it felt like 2 tons of bondage had been released from my spirit. Things had no longer happened to me. They had actually happened for me, because I had designed it this way. I was a co-creator of my experience, a divine co-creator. And so that knowledge just took this huge weight off of me. And so I found myself back in front of the table of beings, and I thanked them for all of this information. And they said, okay, so now you're ready to go back. And I was like, no, I'm glad that I know what's going on, but I'm not going back. I said, you guys don't actually tell us what Earth is like. You don't prepare us at all for what the mission is going to be. And they said, listen, this isn't a punishment. This is just something that you signed up for. And it literally is the blink of an eye because they don't have linear time there. So like our life experience, our human experience here seems like it's 80 human years long. But in reality, it's like 3 seconds. It's nothing. It's like waking up from a dream. And so they told me that I had to come back. And I said, well, I can't go back into her. And I could perceive my body outside of myself. I said, she's glitched. She's all messed up. She needs way too much healing. There's no way to accomplish it. I can't go back into that body. And they said, okay, if you won't go back into her, then we'll show you the baby that you'll be born into. And they showed me this baby, and they showed me everything about her life. And this baby was going to have to complete the grocery cart that I had already picked. And not only that, but she had some extra things in her cart as well because of the family that she was going to be born into. And I thought, oh man, I definitely cannot start from zero. If these are my only options, I guess I'm going back into the body that I just came from. And they said, as I started to sift back into my awareness, they said, trust us. The second part of your life will not be nearly as challenging as the first. The first part of your life was boot camp, and the second part of your life will be carrying out your mission. And you're going to have soulmates and mentors and teachers and kindred spirits, and they're all going to help you along the way. Just trust us. And I was like, I do not trust you guys. And then I found myself back in my body on my bathroom floor.
Do you ever get people doubting you or questioning your experience?
Definitely. Well, I thought that the whole experience was drug-induced psychosis because all I knew was that I took a bunch of drugs and then I thought I was talking to God. I was not a believer of my experience. So I can definitely understand how other people wouldn't believe. But for me, the transformation, I mean, you can see before and after pictures of me. And they're all over my social media. I post them because I think that it's really important to show the transformation. What happened to me, I know that it was a real experience, not only because of the transformation that physically took place in my life and emotionally and spiritually, but also because, it's so apparent. It really is. And there were so many signs and synchronicities and these magical stories that took place after to put me onto a different path in life. So, if for me, it's not any of my business what anybody else thinks of me or my experience or other people's experiences. I'm just here holding light and sharing truth. And for some people it will resonate and for some people it won't. But I'm still fulfilling my purpose regardless of how other people take it in.
Kind of like that Bible verse, by their fruit ye shall know. Like regardless if they believe or not, let's look at the transformation that happened. And I appreciate that. Were you shown anything about like soul? Sometimes you hear about a soul family or spirit guides. What are those for those that may not know?
Yeah. So we come here with tribes of other souls. So, it's something that we've lost as time has gone on. But when we were first humans on Earth, we belonged in tribes of other humans, and that's something that we've lost along the way. And now everybody's so about independence and being so individual. But at one point in time, we couldn't survive without the help of other people. And I don't think that anything has changed. I feel that way still, that we can't survive without the help of others. So we incarnate in the same soul family over and over again. So for instance, my father in this lifetime, we are soulmates. And we have incarnated in multiple other lives together for like all of time, really. And he's my number one spirit guide. He's always with me. But in other lifetimes, we were mother and son, husband and wife, brother and sister, and we've played all these different roles for each other over and over again. So generally, a person will have members of their soul family. It will usually always be like a child and a parent relationship. I shouldn't say always, but very often it's a child and a parent relationship. If you've ever met somebody that you felt like this is my soulmate, they probably are. And that doesn't mean that a soulmate stays in your life forever. It means that a soulmate has made an agreement with you, another soul has made an agreement with you to carry out a specific soul lesson. And it could be the lesson of rejection and abandonment or death and grief, or it could be the lesson of creating a family together and then it dissolving. I mean, there's so many options, and very rarely is it we are going to be in each other's lives forever as far as romantic relationships. That's what I perceive anyway. But soul families are amazing. Spirit guides as well. They're generally our soul families, people that have crossed over. Those are some of our main spirit guides.
So people might be thinking this is kind of weird for some people with their belief systems or conditioning, but what's the purpose of coming back and forth, reincarnation?
That's such a great question. Just a little baby small question. What's the point of the world?
from your understanding.
So, I love that. Yeah. My understanding. So this is like a roller coaster. And the same way that when you go to an amusement park and you go on the roller coaster and you're like so hyped to finally get to the front of the line, and then you're on it and you have this great time, and then it's over and you're like, wow, that was only 40 seconds. I want to do that again. And so then you go back on the line and you do the roller coaster again. Maybe you sit in a different seat this time. You go to the front instead of the back. And that's really what I think we're doing over and over again. Now, another thing that really helps my human mind grasp this experience that we're having here is that we're here to learn lessons. Now, I mean, it can be argued because our souls are infinite and perfect as they are. They don't actually need to learn lessons. But, for me, that linear understanding really helps. So my soul is here to evolve itself, to transmute negative energy, to call in more light so that it can get its triple doctorate in divinity in Earth school. So I think a lot of the times we come back because there's other lessons that we want to learn and we want to play different roles in different people's lives.
Yeah, thank you. Going back to your childhood, you mentioned trauma, and a lot of times in the rooms they say hurt people, and I love how you brought that up. I like to say traumatized people, and traumatized people lose the ability to love, and we actually start to spell it backwards, where we become extremely selfish and self-centered, and we create all these different patterns. But if you look back at your childhood, can you see how these painful experiences that get trapped in us, these emotions and these thought patterns, because I've seen you nickname yourself Buddha Betty, and I like to nickname myself Buddha G. But the Buddha observed the world, and he says most people suffer from wrong perceptions. And when I went back to my childhood, I got to see how these experiences that I didn't know how to communicate about and didn't know how to process correctly as a young child, how they affected my perception and my belief systems about me and the world around me. So I guess my question is, were you able to see going through the steps or where you're at now, look back and see how that affected your, that voice, created that voice in the head, created this false persona to protect yourself, and how it affected your brain development to think in healthy ways?
Well, I love everything that you just said. Thank you. I've never heard that thing about love being spelt backwards. My mind is totally blown right now. It's like incredible. So I don't think that anybody has access to healthy ways of thinking. It doesn't matter if you come from a rich, affluent, well-adjusted family, or if you come from a completely impoverished, addicted family. I think that a part of the human experience is to mislearn everything so that when you come to a point of awakening or enough is enough, then you start to relearn things in a true way, or whatever you perceive true to be. So I don't know. And because I have this deep knowingness in the pre-birth plan, it's not like I look back at childhood and I say like, oh, why did that have to happen to me? Or, why did this happen to them? Instead, I say, okay, we signed up for this, and I will never be able to comprehend the reasons why, because I have this limited human perspective. But today I have unwavering faith and belief that my soul knows what's going on, and I don't really need to be informed of it. I'm only here to play this human part and to do these little human things so that my soul can experience itself, so that God can experience itself. So I definitely see where my childhood shaped my false beliefs. And, like, it's not my parents' fault because their parents taught them and they were just teaching me what they knew. And even before that, generation after generation is just teaching. They're all doing the best that they can. I don't think that anybody's maliciously misinforming us. I think that we are a society of misinformed. And I think that a big part of the Great Awakening is the transformation of that. And you'll see people start to become awoken and activated, and they do it in all different ways. And they're not all ways that I agree with. Like somebody who's extremely conservative and right wing, in some way, they're sort of awakening because they're realizing that there's something wrong with the system. But like, do I agree with what they believe? No, I don't. But, like at least there's some aspect of them beginning to think outside of this societal programmed box that we've all been born into, And I think that's the fun of the experience, is just being able to undo all that conditioning and then to design your new conditioning.
I love how I just did a recording with Elle. I don't know if you know Elle, but she had a near-death experience as well. And she also mentions the life review. And what I loved about the life review is I actually did a life review in the 4th step of the 12 steps. And I didn't realize it and what it did for me is when I started to understand the nature of my own suffering, I started to, that saying, don't judge me until you're in my shoes. I started to put myself in my mother's shoes, my father's shoes, my enemies, and so on. And when I started to have that deep understanding and understanding trauma and the hurt and the pain that affected my brain development and created my wrong perception, man, I started to have compassion for other people at a deeper sense. So I say the 4th step helped me switch my lens. Instead of looking through the lens of the fear-based ego, I started looking through the lens of the heart. And for that truly changed me, to be honest. I have a lot more compassion for life itself today because of those 12 steps.
I love that. Yeah. And if anybody's listening and they're not an addict or an alcoholic and they think that they don't qualify to do the 12 steps, you absolutely do. There's the 12 steps are a highly spiritual program, and it's really about surrender and then developing belief in something greater than yourself, doing a dissection of your old self, and then having maintenance to inhabit your new self, like the person that you desire to be, a more spiritually awoken person. So for me, it was the same thing. The 4th step, which if anybody's unaware, is a fearless and moral inventory of oneself. And basically you go into really uncomfortable stuff in your past. And the steps are in order for a reason. So 1, 2, and 3 is about getting a foundation in faith. And if you don't like the word faith, a foundation in service, a foundation in spirit. But without that foundation, if I would have started to take on all this really icky stuff that I started to dissect in this 4th step, I would have definitely relapsed. But because I had this great foundation in my relationship with a higher power, it was much easier for me to get through it. And the 4th step can be really lengthy. It took me over a year to do 4 and 5. And the 5th step is where you tell somebody all the stuff in your 4th step. And, it was a really big undertaking. I wanted to do it all at once. I was like, I'll be done in a week. And I started to work like 4 hours a day on it. And I realized, I'm going to put myself in a bad situation. I am going to emotionally relapse, physically relapse. Something bad's going to happen if I keep trying to do all this work all at once. I don't want a microwaved recovery. I want a long-lasting, slow and steady recovery. And so I really take my time. But I love that you're talking about that. And I just want to drop a resource for anybody. If you don't belong to a 12-step fellowship or you can't really see yourself being part of one, Gabrielle Bernstein has this great book called Judgment Detox. And it's essentially a 4th step, but it's put in words for the collective, maybe people who don't identify as addicted to something. So I highly recommend that if you want to start to take a deeper look at yourself, but always make sure that you have a foundation in faith before you start doing uncomfortable inner work.
Yeah, I think if people get confused with 12 steps, we can put it in different words, learning how to live on a spiritual basis. So I guess my next question is for you is, what's the importance of living on a spiritual basis for you and for human beings in general?
Well, I'm not going to speak truth for anybody else, but I'll tell you about me. So here's one of the big takeaways from my experience. There is no such thing as condemnation. Despite what other spiritual books, like how you might interpret them, I am living proof that there is no such thing as condemnation. So I could have come back from my experience and kept living the way that I was. And I tried. When I came back from the experience, I kept using drugs. I kept stealing from people. I kept lying. I kept manipulating until the universe pushed me onto another path quite violently. They were like, hey, girl, you're finished. Now you're living over here. Let's do this. But, for me today, I choose to live my life by spiritual principles because it feels better. The way that I live my life today, I live my life service oriented. I want to be of service. It's my first thought when I open my eyes in the morning is, I'm grateful for the roof over my head. Please let me be of service to someone today. Because for me, that feels like the best high, that this is the high that I've been looking for my whole life. And it doesn't involve taking any chemicals. And you could have never paid me money to believe that. But truly being of service to other people is this great spiritual connection for me. So for me, living a more spiritually centered life means that, number one, my life is easier because I don't have to worry about like who I lied to or who I need to avoid or, like this or that or people, places, and things. I can just live my life authentically and honestly. And I don't have to have any fear because the spiritual principle of courage and authenticity gives me this great foundation to live my life without fear. And, I have this unconditional love that I get to live my life by because of the communities that I'm a part of, and 12 Step being one of the main communities. And I'm so grateful for that awareness that I can find love in places where I wasn't programmed to believe. In my life, I thought that love only meant romantic love. And so I had to find some guy who would be willing to put up with me. But today I have real spiritual connections with other people inside of a whole community. It's a whole tribe, my soul family, and it's incredible. So yeah, living a spiritually led life for me, living my life by spiritual principles, it just feels better. So if you're a human who hasn't experienced that good feeling, just give it a go. Give it a little try. Like, what's the harm? Your misery can be refunded, right? You don't have to keep at it if you don't like it. But for me, I dig it a lot.
Yeah, some people may not even like the term spiritual basis or spirituality. But I learned when I just learned how to be more mindful, more considerate, more careful with my actions and take responsibility for my own life on a daily basis, I find more peace with myself. So I guess that was what I found for me, the importance of being human and learning how to be more mindful and living on some kind of spiritual basis, because we find inner peace with doing that and more connection with life itself. So yeah, thank you. I say thank you a lot, so I apologize for that.
I love it.
It's a habit.
I'll take your gratitude.
What's the most profound thing you've learned in the 12-step community, if you don't mind me asking, or spirituality?
Wow. So I think, one of the most profound things that I've learned in 12-step is that, I guess in all spiritual communities, is that my thoughts are not based in reality. Generally, they're not. So, my first thought is usually a fear-based thought. And now that I've been in recovery for 4.5 years, so I've got more of a foundation in being able to refocus my thoughts. I've done a lot of reprogramming work, but something that I've learned in 12-step is that I don't have to medicate my feelings. I can allow my feelings to be what they are. So my whole life, I thought that my feelings were too big for me, that I would never be able to handle them. But 12-step has taught me that I can handle them. And another amazing thing that 12-step has taught me is how to develop this relationship with a higher power. And that's my biggest takeaway from being a part of 12-step community, is that they have helped me conceptualize my higher power. And it changes because I change. So my conception of God, when I first came into 12 step, is not the same conception that I have today. And that's okay because I'm growing and evolving. And so my idea of a higher power is also growing and evolving. And that's one of my favorite things about 12 step is that you can believe in whatever you want. You can be an atheist, agnostic, free thinker. You can subscribe to a particular religion and none of that matters. Like you can do whatever you want to do. And so for me, that autonomy and that freedom is a huge part of why I love 12 step fellowship specifically so much.
I chose a doorknob in the beginning, but I learned that shit turned on me real quick.
I love it.
I'm just playing.
I've never heard that one before. That's great.
I've had some good experiences. I also experienced a lot of the dogma that can take place. I don't know about the fellowship you're in, but so I have to be careful with that. There's so much gratitude for the 12-step communities, but also there's a lot of dogma that I try to challenge and just stay open-minded, because I think the greatest thing for me in the 12-step communities is learning how to be willing, honest, and open-minded. And I got to continue to do that. I think that's the key to spirituality. Kind of like that Chinese mystic Lao Tzu said, to learn something new every day is knowledge, to let go of something every day is wisdom. And I got to continue to let go of stuff, even stuff when I was brand new. I learned how to let go of eventually because it's no longer useful for me in my journey, my spiritual journey.
Right. Yes, I feel the same way. There are so many things that I've had to let go of. And that's one of the tools of 12 step as well, is like letting go. Yeah, I don't have to hang on to this with claw marks in it. I can just let go.
Yeah, Snoop Dogg wrote a song on the 4th step, and it's called Drop It Like It's Hot. And I learned how to drop stuff like it's hot, like these resentments, because it was only killing me. And you hear that in the rooms all the time. Holding on to resentment is like drinking poison, wishing for that other person to die. It only kills you, And I learned how to just drop those stuff because it was all unnecessary suffering. And again, I think a lot of that stuff happened automatically when I really tapped into that awareness and that deeper understanding of the nature of my suffering and the suffering of others. One of the things I learned in the 4th-step area is to put myself on stage with that person that I resented and replay that whole thing and sit in the audience. Like Wayne Dyer says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And I got to sit in the audience and see how that I was threatened, how that affected me, and how I wanted these people in the crowd to perceive me as, and what I feel I was losing or not getting. And when I did that, man, that shit changed me a lot. It gave me a lot of compassion and understanding. Like I said, I learned how to look through the lens of the heart, through the 4th step, through that life review, I call it. Now I call it. Thanks to you guys that had these NDE experiences, you gave me better wording to use for that. So
yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm like writing down all of your little 12-step gems. I'm going to bring them to my home group. They're going to be blown away. They're going to be like, "Oh my God, Betty, you're so funny." Drop it like it's hot. Really? So, I always feel like I'm in a life review inside of a meeting. Now, whenever I celebrate, every year in 12-step fellowship, we celebrate another year in recovery. And when I have my anniversary, it feels like a real time life review. I get to hear how I've impacted other people in the fellowship, if they choose to share about me. But like, I get to hear these just amazing things. And it's amazing to look around a room and feel like I'm actually in the middle of a life review. And I'll tell you that the life reviews I have today are much better than the one I had when I died, for sure. They're getting better and better each time.
Yeah, I had a painful awakening myself. It wasn't like yours, but it was, I experienced what the Buddha called Nirvana. And that was through a lot of pain. I think Eckhart Tolle is the one that said, in the beginning of addiction, there is pain. And at the end of all addiction, there is pain. I'm not sure if that's true for everybody, but it was definitely true for me. And I was in so much pain. I woke up, something like I shifted in. I had like an inner shift in me where I woke up to, I was in a different state of consciousness, but the word Nirvana means to blow out. And for a brief second, I blew out that little egoic flame of thoughts, and emotions, and that conscious separation from my body. I was like no longer identified with the body for a brief moment. I don't remember if I experienced peace, but I remember I experienced a state of nothingness, which can be peace, I guess. But then as fast as that happened, it was those magic candles, and they turned back on. And then I was full of fear, and I was scared, and I needed help. And my friend Isidro actually opened the door and asked me if I wanted to go to a 12-step meeting, and that was where my journey all started. So, yeah.
Wow, that is a powerful testimony. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing it with me. That's incredible. Yeah, the way that I found myself into 12-step was after the awakening. I was so broken and so lost and confused, and my world had started to get really small and tiny to where I couldn't get drugs, I couldn't get high, everything was falling apart, and I was on a train and I had no destination, and this man appeared across from me. And he was wearing a Narcotics Anonymous necklace, these big blinged out NA letters, like all jeweled around his neck. And I knew what that was because I had, tried before. And I knew that he was an angel in my path. He was the only other person in the train car. He sat right across from me. And so I asked him if he was going to a meeting and if he would take me with him. And he did. And that was when my recovery journey started. And I love when we have like the tangible evidence of something greater than ourselves, that we are step 2 people. Step 2 is about coming to believe that you can be restored to sanity. And that's the tangible evidence. Like you can hold on to that, and it's so important. I think it's so important for us to share our stories because people are looking for that hope. And if they haven't experienced a miracle for themselves yet, which they definitely can. I mean, if we can, they can. But if they haven't experienced a miracle yet, then they can borrow our miracle in the meantime, because all of us are a miracle. It's a miracle that we're here, that we're living on earth at the exact same moment in time with each other, that we're here for this great awakening, that there's this transformation happening right before our eyes. I mean, you can see it in the insanity that's going on. There is something beautiful that's going to come from all of it. But yeah, thank you for sharing your step 2 moment. I love that.
Yeah. Step 2, I have so many moments with step 2, but came to believe in a power greater than ourselves. I remember I was homeless, and I had family that could open the door, but I burned a lot of bridges, and my pride kept me from knocking on that door. And my sister was paying for my phone. I couldn't pay anything, but anyways, I remember 30 days of sobriety. I got a job, and I'm driving with the guy I'm working with, and I look up, and it was raining. It was around December in 2009, and I look up in the sky, and I seen a beam of light just shining forth out of the gray and dark clouds, right? And I had this feeling of you're on the right path, and that's where I came to believe in step 2. And some people have a problem with the higher power thing. So I usually tell people if they have a problem with the higher power, let's look at it in a different way. Came to believe in a new way of living that can restore you to sanity. Because the word sanity really just means healthy, and we got to look at what's creating this unhealthiness in this unhealthy state that we're stuck in. So I'm actually writing a book right now called Awakening Within. And I'm breaking down the 12 steps and trying to give 3 different ways to look at the steps for people that may have different problems. Because a lot of times the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is a little outdated on science. And Bill Wilson only knew so much at the time when he wrote the book. And sometimes the wording's kind of outdated as well. So try to get people to get past the wording and touch the principle in their heart to create that transformation.
Well, I love that you're writing something to help people with that. I've had the same idea about, taking all of the principles and all of the different communities that I've been a part of and meshing them all into one sort of like, let's help each other productive book. And I love you saying that because I feel like that's a mirror for me, and that's really beautiful. I'm glad to hear that. And, I think that for me, I'm actually surrounded by a lot of people who get hung up on language. And that just drives me absolutely crazy because, language isn't even real. It's just something that we've made up. And so to get super hung up on, on language, especially when it comes to recovery, is for me, it drives me crazy. Like when people get upset with the word God, it's like, it's just a word, man. Like it's not that big. It's not that big of a deal. And that word has helped millions of people. So maybe step away from your terminal uniqueness and just agree that this has been working for, 70 years in my fellowship, even longer in yours, 100 years, right? And I mean, like, we don't need to do too much. It can be, for me, like, I get very defensive about the things that I'm passionate about. I'm very passionate about 12 step. I know that I had tried everything in my life to let go of my trauma and to let go of my addiction, and nothing ever worked. And so at some point, I just allowed it to become my whole personality. Like, I am covered in tattoos of liquor bottles and packs of cigarettes. Okay. Like, how embarrassing. This was my whole identity. And 12 step is one of the main tools that helped me dismantle that. And so when I hear people tearing it to pieces or getting really upset about a certain, phrase or a certain reading, it tears me up because I want to defend it. In all reality, I don't need to defend it. Like, that's just one trigger that I need to work on. I can allow people to be where they're at, but I'm not all the way healed yet. Okay. I still have work to do.
Yeah, I used to defend it all the time. Now I learned to just let go. I think it happens automatically, organically as we continue on.
Yeah, I'm tired of rolling my eyes. I'm like, hello, can I get some butter with these eye rolls? Give me a break.
Yeah, I don't put the 12-step fellowship that I'm in down, but I do challenge it to continue to grow because, like Gabor Mate says, every 3 weeks there's a 9/11. And we don't even talk about that in addiction. And that's not even including the legal drugs, the legal, like alcohol or cigarettes. And cigarettes kill more people than alcohol and heroin. That's crazy to think about it. And it's legal. So we don't even talk about that. But every 3 weeks is a 9/11. That's crazy.
That's very powerful statement.
So any last words? Anything you've forgotten that you would love to share with us?
Well, I love talking about recovery. So thank you so much for giving me that space. A lot of the times when I talk with people, I'm only sharing about the spiritual experience. But, it wasn't like I did have a profound spiritual experience, but that doesn't mean that I'm cured or healed automatically. There are years, decades of trauma to my physical being. And so all of that continues to heal with the help of certain spiritual communities. So 12-step fellowship, obviously, we've been gabbing about it for so long. It is an amazing, amazing tool. I also study A Course in Miracles, which some people call the graduate work to the 12 steps. And it's also a reprogramming. And I belong to certain spiritual faiths. I have a Baha'i group. I study the Baha'i faith with a group of people. I belong to a group for near-death experiencers and spiritual experiencers with the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And so I think my closing thought is that community is the antidote. Connection is the antidote to not only addiction, but to isolation, to depression, like being around other people, like finding your soul family. And for me, it was just as simple as writing it down on a piece of paper. This pen is a magic wand. This is as close as I'm ever going to become to Harry Potter. And so I write down the things that I desire to call into my experience. And so I wrote down, I said, send me my people, send me my soul family, send me my tribe. And they all manifest in all of these different beautiful communities that I'm a part of. So if you're looking for community and you want to get connected, please reach out. My information will be in the liner notes of this episode, and I would love to connect you to community. I love acting as a resource broker in that way. So I'm so grateful for this space. Thank you so much. Thank you for staying in recovery and paving the way for an addict like me. And I'm eternally grateful for this conversation today. You really filled my spirit.
No, thank you. Wayne Dyer once said, a hostile person lives in a hostile road. A loving person lives in a loving road. Same road. And I hear that transformation in you. So thank you and take care. Namastizzle.